you know, sir? Then?
Did I know I just met the most dangerous dark wizard of all time?
He opened his eyes and found that he and Dumbledore were standing in a bustling, old-fashioned London street. "There I am," said Dumbledore brightly, pointing ahead of them to a tall figure crossing the road in front of a horse-drawn milk cart. This younger Albus Dumbledore's long hair and beard were auburn. Having reached their side of the street, he strode off along the pavement, drawing many curious glances due to the flamboyantly cut suit of plum velvet that he was wearing. They followed his younger self a short distance, finally passing through a set of iron gates into a bare courtyard that fronted a rather grim square building surrounded by high railings. He mounted the few steps leading to the front door and knocked once. After a moment or two, the door was opened by a scruffy girl wearing an apron. "Good afternoon. I have an appointment with a Mrs. Cole, who, I believe, is the matron here." "Oh," said the bewildered-looking girl, taking in Dumbledore's eccentric appearance. Just a mo. Mrs. Cole!" she bellowed over her shoulder. Harry heard a distant voice shouting something in response. The girl turned back to Dumbledore. "Come in. She's on her way." Dumbledore stepped into a hallway tiled in black and white. The whole place was shabby but spotlessly clean. Before the front door had closed behind them, a skinny, harassed-looking woman came scurrying toward them. She had a sharp-featured face that appeared more anxious than unkind, and she was talking over her shoulder to another aproned helper as she walked toward Dumbledore. "Good afternoon," said Dumbledore, holding out his hand. Mrs. Cole simply gaped. "My name is Albus Dumbledore. I sent you a letter requesting an appointment, and you very kindly invited me here today." Mrs. Cole blinked. Apparently deciding that Dumbledore was not a hallucination, she said feebly, "Oh, yes. Well, then, you'd better come into my room, yes." She led Dumbledore into a small room that seemed part sitting room, part office. It was as shabby as the hallway, and the furniture was old and mismatched. She invited Dumbledore to sit on a rickety chair and seated herself behind a cluttered desk, eyeing him nervously. "I am here, as I told you in my letter, to discuss Tom Riddle and arrangements for his future," said Dumbledore. "Are you family?" asked Mrs. Cole. "No, I am a teacher," said Dumbledore. "I have come to offer Tom a place at my school." "What school's this, then?" "It is called Hogwarts," said Dumbledore. "And how come you're interested in Tom?" "We believe he has qualities we're looking for." "You mean he's won a scholarship? How can he have done? He's never been entered for one." "Well, his name has been down for our school since birth." "Who registered him? His parents?" There was no doubt that Mrs. Cole was an inconveniently sharp woman. Apparently Dumbledore thought so too, for Harry now saw him slip his wand out of the pocket of his velvet suit, at the same time picking up a piece of perfectly blank paper from Mrs. Cole's desktop. "Here," said Dumbledore, waving his wand once as he passed her the piece of paper. "I think this will make everything clear." Mrs. Cole's eyes slid out of focus and back again as she gazed intently at the blank paper for a moment. "That seems perfectly in order," she said placidly, handing it back. Then her eyes fell upon a bottle of gin and 2 glasses that had certainly not been present a few seconds before. May I offer you a glass of gin?" she said in an extra-refined voice. "Thank you very much," said Dumbledore, beaming. Pouring both of them a generous measure, she drained her own glass in one gulp. Smacking her lips frankly, she smiled at Dumbledore for the first time, and he didn't hesitate to press his advantage. "I was wondering whether you could tell me anything of Tom Riddle's history. I think he was born here in the orphanage?" "That's right," said Mrs. Cole, helping herself to more gin. "I remember it clear as anything, because I just started here myself. New Year's Eve, and bitter cold, snowing, you know. Nasty night. And this girl, not much older than I was myself at the time, came staggering up the front steps. Well, she wasn't the first. We took her in, and she had the baby within the hour, and she was dead in another hour." "Did she say anything before she died?" asked Dumbledore. "Anything about the boy's father, for instance?" "Now, as it happens, she did," said Mrs. Cole, who seemed to be rather enjoying herself now, with the gin in her hand and an eager audience for her story. "I remember she said to me, 'I hope he looks like his papa.' And I won't lie, she was right to hope it, because she was no beauty. And then she told me he was to be named Tom for his father, and Marvolo for her father. Yes, I know, a funny name, isn't it? We wondered whether she came from a circus, and she said the boy's surname was to be Riddle, and she died soon after that, without another word. Well, we named him just as she'd said. It seemed so important to the poor girl. But no Tom, nor Marvolo, nor any kind of Riddle ever came looking for him, nor any family at all. So he stayed in the orphanage, and he's been here ever since." Mrs. Cole helped herself almost absent-mindedly to another healthy measure of gin. Then she said, "He's a funny boy." "Yes," said Dumbledore, "I thought he might be." "He was a funny baby, too. He hardly ever cried, you know, and then, when he got a little older, he was odd." "Odd in what way?" asked Dumbledore gently. "Well, he—" But Mrs. Cole pulled up short, and there was nothing blurry or vague about the inquisitorial glance she shot Dumbledore over her gin-glass. "He's definitely got a place at your school, you say?" "Definitely," said Dumbledore. "And nothing I say can change that?" "Nothing," said Dumbledore. "You'll be taking him away, whatever?" "Whatever," repeated Dumbledore gravely. She squinted at him as though deciding whether or not to trust him. "He scares the other children." "You mean he is a bully?" asked Dumbledore. "I think he must be," said Mrs. Cole, frowning slightly. "But it's very hard to catch him at it. There have been incidents, nasty things." Dumbledore did not press her, though Harry could tell that he was interested. "Billy Stubbs's rabbit. Well, Tom said he didn't do it, and I don't see how he could have done, but even so, it didn't hang itself from the rafters, did it?" "I shouldn't think so, no," said Dumbledore quietly. "But I'm jiggered if I know how he got up there to do it. All I know is he and Billy had argued the day before, and then—" Mrs. Cole took another swig of gin, slopping a little over her chin this time. "On the summer outing. We take them out, you know, once a year to the countryside or to the seaside. Well, Amy Benson and Dennis Bishop were never quite right afterwards, and all we ever got out of them was that they'd gone into a cave with Tom Riddle. He swore they'd just gone exploring, but something happened in there, I'm sure of it. And, well, there have been a lot of things. Funny things." She looked around at Dumbledore again, and though her cheeks were flushed, her gaze was steady. "I don't think many people will be sorry to see the back of him. You understand, I'm sure, that we will not be keeping him permanently," said Dumbledore. "He will have to return here, at the very least, every summer." "Oh, well, that's better than a whack on the nose with a rusty poker," said Mrs. Cole, with a slight hiccup. She got to her feet, and Harry was impressed to see that she was quite steady, even though 2/3 of the gin was now gone. "I suppose you'd like to see him?" "Very much," said Dumbledore, rising too.